even though I'm living in Britain now, I haven't been attracted to the mushrooms. Yet I am extremely attracted to this. And funny enough, I have a very strong connection with Oaxaca and have been there many times. Yes, exactly. And so that in itself is important to me. Also, I want to use it almost as a prayer and as a way to heal one of the deepest pains I have, and that is my disconnect with plants.
Yes, well, I think two important points there. The first one that you raise is really significant, which is we're not talking about physically where somebody is necessarily born with the relevance of the plant that grows there. It's where your mind is at. So if you have an intimate relationship with a certain location, or you have an affinity with a certain mode of thinking, then of course where your plant medicine resonance is going to be slightly different. And certainly for people who travel, and as a Englishman living in America now, I could put myself in that category. My custom built medicine has changed, and it isn't psilocybin mushroom. It isn't. It's not part of my journey right now. So I totally get that, and it's a very interesting observance. The other side of it is a very important one as well that she raised, which is the irony and the beauty of saying having what we would call perhaps an entheogenic experience with a plant helps you to reacquaint yourself with the whole plant kingdom. It's a way in to the entire kingdom. And in the same way that you would enter through an airport or a ferry terminal or something, I often get the sense with these things that when approached in that sincerely reverential manner, and when understood to be a sacred movement of consciousness, and you're doing something that I think is magical in the true sense of the word, then you do get the sense that you're going into a space where you're the beginner, really, and you kind of are like the innocent, and you're well looked after there, and it's wise to go in respectful and with some humility. And if you do so, then the kind of welcome and the sort of grace that is bestowed upon you is stunning, really. And after the experience, of course, and with salvia, that's a relatively short one, that resonance continues, and it helps to build back up that connection. As you say, it's extremely encouraging, and it does change your relationship with the environment you live in. And I now live on the edge of a forest also, by the way, so I do know what you're talking about.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. I'm sitting here with tears in my eyes, and I just feel it's very special. So thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Paul, you got a question for Neil?
Yeah. Hi, Neil.
Hey, Paul.
How are you?
I'm very good. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. I'm in Wales, yeah. The question is, have you considered Christ's references to casting out the first stone and knowing thyself are describing psychological projection and the process of removing ego? And if you have, does that mean that Christ was a Buddhist?
That's a great question. I would say what we perceive Christ as now is probably a long way from what actually he was doing here, if he was a guy indeed. And from the studies that I've made, particularly in the realm of what the Christians would call pre-Christian, early Christian Gnosticism, specifically the Nag Hammadi tractates, then I think that it becomes pretty clear as you're reading through these, because particularly with those texts, you're getting this very broad view from many different angles. So you're getting like alchemical, hermetic, philosophical, Valentinian angles, all kinds of stuff, as well as straightforward Christian perspectives. But you're getting many, many different views of who this guy was and what he was here and what he was doing. And in your question, is this person's ability to map polarity to absorb negative energy. And if you want to interpret Christianity from a very positive point of view, you could say that examining Christ's transformation of pain is very interesting. And if you want to call that sin or ignorance or unholiness, you can, draw out different conclusions from that. But it's very interesting because whatever he did and whatever interpretation you take on that, if this man was here, whatever his name was and whatever he was doing, if that guy was there and many of those accounts are legitimate, he was transforming energy at a very primal level, at a very fundamental level, and he was bending physics. And he was an avatar, if you like, in the sense that he was a divine being who was very aware of his avatar status. And you could say, well, it's pretty reasonable to say many avatars come down, and one day we could call it Buddha, and one day we could call that avatar Christ, and another day we could call it Thomas Anderson from The Matrix. You know what I mean? It doesn't really matter what it is. And again, I think you could kind of chase your own tail for an awfully long time trying to figure out what Christ did. And certainly, assuming that the words in the King James Bible are accurate is very foolish indeed now, I think, because that's simply not the case. However, there is a lot of embedded wisdom in there, but it requires a high degree of scholarship to interpret that. And if you really want to do it objectively from a sort of completely bipartisan, independent, sovereign perspective, then you need to also do an awful lot of cross-referencing. But yes, the process of removing the ego and communion with the divine is very Buddhist. Except they don't use the word divine, they just call it Buddhahood. And Buddha, as you probably know, is not a person, it's a title. And it just means enlightened one, essentially. So to be a Buddha is not specific to an individual. There was someone who came down to found it, perhaps, if you might want to look at it that way. But once it's been forged and established, and I mean forge in the sense that you would forge a sword or a hammer, in that you create it and you fabricate it from natural materials and you create that pattern, then you're saying this is what's possible, and this is what we call ascendance, and it's natural, and everyone can do it, and I'm not special, and now I'm out of here, goodbye. And they all kind of say that, and yet the religions that grow up around them do the reverse of that, to say only through Christ can you have salvation, which, going back to what seems a while ago now, we talked about Protestant work ethics, and it was the Calvinists who basically suggested that only through that particular man and through that particular religious doctrine could you have any chance of ascendance, which is the polar opposite of what Christ as a real individual would teach, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. Well, basically, you've answered my next question in that, because I was talking about Christ dying for our sins and whether it was just he was transferring energy from himself and taking energy back. So as a magnetic charge, and if I could say that. Mm-hmm. So I'll add another part of the question, which is you more or less answered anyway. Have you considered the Hermetica descriptions of the primordial substance and transmutation is describing what was once seen in a more energetic Earth?
Yeah, I would. That's very interesting. I would agree with that. I would say that the big principle in Hermeticism, separate necessarily from its roots of Egyptian magic, as it's kind of mid. I don't know, let's think, probably 13th, 14th, 15th century alchemists in Western Europe. I would say that if you go back to that source material, the principle from where a lot of the modern alchemy emanates, and for me that doesn't, the foundations of it don't begin with Hermes Trismegistus. I think it goes way further back than that, just like everything else.
Yeah.
But what the principle, nevertheless, is always the same, which is the thing is shrouded in such concrete metaphor that it's like almost like self-initiation is required to move beyond that. So the principles of saying hermetic and alchemical principles of saying the Son is the Father is the starting point here, and the solar education necessary to understand the principles of practical alchemy as well as inner alchemy are profound, and they're actually all mapped out in the Emerald Tablet text, which again is a pretty modern interpretation of something that was far older. But they're actually all mapped out in there. But it takes many, many years to appreciate quite how easy it is to oversimplify that. And the beauty of alchemy is that at every level it works. So it works whether you're doing, and there are many of these people still around. I know one guy in Australia does this. There is laboratory alchemy around where people are transmuting materials into other materials. But the real alchemy and the secret of alchemy, and this is an open secret that you can read in the Kybalion, for example, is that the transformation is really the alchemists themselves. It's not what they're working with. It's the alchemist's own consciousness that transforms. So just in the same way, again, to refer to The Matrix, I'm not going to mention this film again for 100 years after this. When Neo speaks to the little boy and he's bending the spoon, the little boy says, it's not the spoon that bends, that's impossible, it's you. It's your mind that changes. It's you that transforms. And when you transform, you can transform anything around you, and you can completely turn the physics inside out if you wish to. And that's the same principle. That is an alchemical principle. And as anyone who's studied the Nag Hammadi text, a lot of it is hermetic wisdom. A lot of it is hermeticism clothed in Christian robes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I think these things were seen. I've done my own research on it, and I spent 20 years on it, and I think possibly the unveiling of this primordial substance is overdue, and I think we will see the serpents in the sky, and I think they're very much similar to what we're using today as waves. Like internet waves or microwaves or whatever, and I think that that's what we will see, and I hope it's not mistaken as alien invasion.
Yeah, I appreciate that observance. That a lot of the energy that we see manifesting in the world, like you can see, UFOs flying over Eugene in Oregon and Hood River in Oregon and up in Seattle, Washington State. You can see, if you look up, because of the darkness in particularly some of the forested regions, and it's heavily forested over in the Pacific Northwest, for those who don't know, you don't get much light pollution. You see stuff flying over all the time, and you can put your computer on with a little astronomy program that will show you what the stars are and also what satellites are flying over. And then we can also differentiate clearly what aeroplanes are. And 80% of what you see flying over is not any of that stuff. They're not astral bodies, they're not aeroplanes, they're not satellites. And I think the principle, having met some UFO researchers at a recent conference in June in Oregon, Washington State, is that a lot of the UFOs are actually light-based. They're not a material in the sense that we would understand it. And so